Hey, welcome to another episode of Medicine 3.0, your podcast for precision health, AI, and medicine. This week, I sit down with Justin Edelman, our head of product at Bionic Health, and we go over what is the Bionic Journey. So many people ask me, like, what does Bionic Health really do? I'm having a hard time understanding. And I think this is going to be a really helpful conversation for you to understand if Bionic is right for you. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. All right, Justin, welcome back to the podcast. I'm excited to have you here. I think you're going to ask me some questions. I'm going to ask you some questions. How are you feeling about this? You feeling ready?
I'm excited. This is my podcast episode number 2. And not to jinx it, but I looked at some of the stats and the last podcast is the most popular podcast ever with me in it.
It's true. It outperformed every other podcast that you were in by far.
That's right. That's right.
It was huge. Let's see if we can make this a runaway hit this time as well.
Excellent. Let's get into it.
All right.
So one thing we talk about a lot, if you've heard the podcast, you see our messaging, we talk about the Bionic Journey as part of the philosophy. What is that?
Yeah. So it's interesting because when we started out Bionic Health, we really had two or three philosophies. One is that we wanted people to be healthier, and we didn't feel like American healthcare was set up to make people healthier. And it's not the fault of the doctors or the hospitals. It's just that that's not the way that we're set up. The second philosophy is that for people to achieve health, we felt like they would need to change. And usually that is either you're changing your habits, you're learning how to exercise, you're learning how to eat healthier. And I often speak about it as like, this is a muscle you have to grow. You're not going to be great at it. It's not like you're going to meet with me one time and then like you're going to eat healthy food after that, or never had a bad day of not exercising or for weeks not exercising. Like, we think of this as like a gradual process. And then number 3 is that you as an individual joining Bionic Health, you have a finite amount of time you can spend on health, and that we want to simplify it as much as possible. So you can go buy a giant book and learn a ton of things about living healthy, but how many people are actually going to read the whole book and be able to implement the whole book? And so that's kind of the third part, is thinking that we have to make this small and bite-sized. So those are kind of the philosophies we came up with of like what we wanted to build. And then, I mean, I think that you, just as much as me, have had a big influence on how we think about this journey thing. For you, how do you kind of think about the journey, and how do you kind of frame it up in your mind?
Yeah, journey is one thing that comes up when you talk to people about their healthcare story and how they're doing either on a diet or exercise. And one thing that sticks out to me about a journey is that all your progress is not up and to the right? It's not all nice and linear or exponentially good. Progress in a lot of health things, for I think almost everyone, it's kind of like you make some progress and then you slip back a little bit and you make some more progress. And I think that resonates with me about the journey. I think also, a journey a lot of times, like hiking, is about the process and about the progress and enjoying it more than just the destination. So also on a good journey, right, you've got a guide, you've got somebody there either to enjoy it with or a partner to help show you around. So I think there's a lot of the messaging there that I think works for health journeys and works for the way that we think about progress for members.
Yeah. And I like that idea of a guide, also a map. Like, if I wanted to climb Kilimanjaro and I started in North Carolina, like, it's unlikely to happen. Like, you need to know where you start and where you're trying to get to and all of those things. So I think, having a guide, having a map, and slowly working towards a great accomplishment. And then I love that you called out that so much is the journey and it's not actually the destination, because I think it's important for people to realize, people will ask us all the time, like, okay, so I do this testing, I learn these things, and then why would I keep using you guys? And I'm like, well, unless you achieve perfection after the one time you meet with us and the one time you do testing, you're going to need us for retesting, for learning, for growing, for adjusting, for all those types of things. So I think the map and the guide and having somebody that you trust there to help you is key.
Yeah, it's funny, my wife asked me a question that I had asked you a long time ago. She had recently gotten more into weightlifting, but we had vacation, we had life stuff, we were doing other stuff. And she asked me, what happens if I stop lifting weights for 2 weeks? And I said, well, they're going to be there waiting on you. And, it's one of those things, right? Where I think this happens for a lot of health things that you do. You buy the new running shoes, you get excited. But sometimes life gets in the way. But the cool thing about the journey is there's always that next day to just get back on the horse, do the thing again. And in diet, exercise, all that stuff, the most important routine is one that you're going to stick with and that you're going to do consistently and you're going to enjoy doing. And so I like that part of it too.
Yeah. And I love, Atomic Habits. James Clear talks about like labeling yourself, giving yourself a label. And so I love the idea of giving yourself a label of I'm a healthy person, I'm a runner, I'm a weightlifter, whatever it is. And it's just like I'm a physician. And even though like I didn't practice medicine in the ER for 5 years, it's not like I stopped being a physician. I had earned that right. And I decided that was part of who I was. And I think the same goes for healthy habits and trying to make change. When you make those decisions, you should never let go of those. Like, even if you don't eat healthy for 6 months, like you might totally binge and like be super unhealthy for 6 months. But if you never let go of that label, then you'll return to it and you'll come back to like continuing to grow in that way. And I think that's another important part of the journey is kind of getting your trail name. Like that's one of the interesting things about hiking the Appalachian Trail is you often get like a trail name. And so like I have a friend who hikes the trail on the Pacific Coast Trail with his, or I guess Pacific Crest Trail with his daughter. And they're doing it little by little and they have trail names from through hikers and everybody knows them by their trail names. And I think part of that is it becomes part of your identity. And I think as part of our journey, we try to instill into our members their trail name is like, now you're a healthy eater. Now you're an exerciser. Now you're a person who cares about your health and your mobility and how your joints feel. And that's kind of another part of the journey that I think is really important.
Awesome. So we have this concept of a journey. Like any journey, how do you get started? What's the first part?
Yeah. So for us, it's very interesting. When we started Bionic Health, we tested a lot of what was already out there. And when you looked at like the health and optimization space, what you would typically find is there were concierge physicians practicing a different kind of medicine than other physicians. Like you might think like direct primary care, because I'm paying cash, I'm going to get a different type of medicine. Usually that's not true. Usually you get better care because you get more access to the doctor, but usually they're not practicing what some people might call longevity care. And I don't really love the term longevity care because I think it's just good health care. We just haven't had that framework in the US of good health care. But what good healthcare looks like is you screen for disease really aggressively and you think of risk in a different way. Instead of a 5 or a 10-year time horizon, you look at 30 or even lifetime time horizon. And then you look at, okay, decrease risk of disease, get rid of that. And then number 2, optimize your mobility, your movement, and how you exist in the world. And so if you do those 2 things, it can be a ton of testing to start. And what we found is you go to a concierge doctor and you pay anywhere from $3,000 to $20,000 to do just a ton of testing. And so much testing that when you get it back, they'll often give you a book on yourself, but that is just one shot in time of your body. And what we found for ourselves as we went through these processes is that it was just way too much. It was too much for us to absorb. And we're pretty health literate, right? We understand what's going on. But it was just too much. So when we first started with our very first members at Bionic Health, we cut it way, way, way back. And that was still way too much. And so now we do very simple kind of blood testing along with a health coach intake. And of course, health coach intake includes all the regular things that you would expect from getting kind of plugged into a clinic. So we're going to ask about your medications, your family history, other diseases you've had in your life, surgeries. Do you smoke? Do you drink? Do you do drugs? Like whatever kind of questions you would typically ask. But then we also dig deep on what's your diet look like? Let's go through a typical diet for you for a week, for a weekday, for a weekend. Let's go through your stress, your sleep, your exercise. And the coach is going to kind of understand what's your intention of coming to Bionic Health? What are you trying to achieve? And then we send you to get some blood testing done. And what you'll see with some clinics is they're going to meet with you first, and then they're going to do blood testing. But we're going to do it a little bit different. We're going to do a basic screening on the most likely things to shorten your life. And those things are going to be dementia, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, and loss of muscle mass. And so we're going to do some of that screening through questions of the coach, and then others of those screenings through blood tests. And those blood tests, it's very comprehensive, more comprehensive than you would expect from your regular doctor, from an annual checkup, but not nearly as much data as you would get if we did all of the testing we care about in one shot. And then you take that blood testing, you take that intake from the coach, and a physician starts working on it to come up with a plan for you. So that's kind of how we start your journey today, is understanding your intention, understanding your goals, understanding where you're at, and then starting to piece together the data. I'll pause right there. Does that sound about right? How would you talk about that any differently?
Yeah, that sounds right. And we call that part baseline, right? We
Yep.
talked a little bit about why we call it baseline, but just practically, right? There's so much you can do in the preventative space, and it all might not be right for you. But even if it were everything that we offer, even for our most like ardent, motivated members, it's just too much to do at one time. And even if you did it all at one time, it's too much to kind of internalize. Like, which parts of this are the targets I'm going to set for myself? I measured something once, and how do I set a target and actually move that thing? So I like the concept of baseline. Do you want to talk a little bit about why we called it that?
Yeah, I mean, it goes to where are you starting today and where do you want to get? And we believe that many of the markers, the blood markers that we check, they're not going to be optimal yet. And we're going to continue to work. And even if they're optimal, we're going to want to keep them optimal. And so that's how I think about the baseline. Is really, it's this time where we kind of start off, we level set. Where are you today? Where do you want to go? What do you want to achieve? And agree on that together. The next piece that I kind of alluded to is a physician is going to sit with your data, going to use the latest in AI technology to synthesize your data and really come up with the best plan for you from a health perspective, and then spend an hour educating you, going over your data and coming up with, okay, this is your baseline. This is where you're at. Where do you want to go? And let's make a plan on how we get there together. And that's really, I think, you've heard this probably more than I have. I've had the opportunity to meet with the patient or the member, but you've had the opportunity to talk to them and figure out when do they really feel that like light bulb moment where they're like, Bionic Health is completely different than anything I've experienced before. So I don't know, what are some of the things that you've heard when you talk to people about that moment when they realize this is different?
Yeah, it's tough overall, right? Because this is an emerging product in some way. It's an emerging space. It's a different way of thinking about healthcare. So you really want to make it so that people can get in and experience it. And one thing that was really clear early on, even when we were just starting out, and even when we had plenty of bumps on the front end of the process, was that when our members got to their 1 hour visit with the doctor and it was completely personalized, it was the most thorough explanation that they've ever had, and they had all the time to get every one of their questions answered. That was the aha moment. That was the moment where no matter how rough it was on the front end, and we've improved it a lot, right? But no matter how long, right? That was always the moment that, okay, I understand this. It's worth it. The thing I like about Baseline overall is you mentioned James Clear earlier, right? And one thing he talks about is the compound interest of self-improvement. And, for those that didn't take time value of money in school, this idea that you make small changes now and over time, they really add up. And so Baseline is really about, in some ways, it doesn't matter where you start from, right? You start, you measure, and you start making progress. And so we get really great feedback on Baseline. We don't include everything so that you can experience part of it and get a path forward. And then just practically too, I think about Baseline, my wife, she has a family history of heart disease. So her path after Baseline is, let's dig into heart disease. My family has Alzheimer's. So I'm interested in, how do I prevent that? And so I think it works well in that way, and just a concrete way as well.
Yeah. As you finish up your Baseline, and you kind of alluded to this, you come out with that plan where it is very specific to you. For example, my family has a great heart history, like very little cardiovascular disease in my immediate family from my parents. And my dad, he had a boss who was a marathon runner who always complained, because my dad was obese most of his life, not very active. He walked a little bit, but he didn't lift weights really or anything like that. And he always had great cholesterol numbers. And his boss, who was a marathon runner, had a heart attack in his 50s and was always complaining at my dad. So like for me, like my heart numbers, always awesome, always great. But there are other things that I care about that are really important for me. Like osteoporosis is really strong. And like as a man, I shouldn't have to worry about that as much. But with my family history, I do care about that more. And cognitive health, kind of like you, like that's something I really care about. If I'm going to live as long as I possibly can, I want to be with it as much as possible, as long as possible. And so I think that's the specificity that comes out of the test. It's not, give us $20,000. We're going to run every test we can possibly think of and then dump all this data on you and try to come up with a plan for you. It's really like, let's understand where you're at and then come up with a very specific plan. And you could decide that you want to do everything that we offer, but you might decide, I'm going to listen to the physician who said, let's do this next thing and this one thing, and let's really work on it. And then we'll move on after that to the next thing. And then we might come back and retest what we're working on for, that we found in your baseline. And I think that just that personalization, that's just key if you really want to make progress in this space. So that's one thing that I think that we've learned from our members, and one thing that they really, really love.
Yep. So we said you start with Baseline, and then you go on to these other areas. And if you've been following the pod, you've probably heard us talk about modules. So it's actually the Baseline module, and then we have these other areas of health that you can dig into. Can you tell us about sort of the genesis of the word module and what it means? It's kind of an word in some ways, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, I think you and I often wonder, is that even the right word? Should we come up with a new word? Because modules sometimes can feel like homework or something that's not great. And I think it really, milestones or at the end of modules, I don't know. Maybe we're going to come up and maybe somebody's going to listen to the podcast and be like, oh, I've got a great name for you. It's way better than modules.
Send us your names. Send us suggestions. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. But the way we think of modules are these small packages of you get testing done, you get analysis done, and you get personalized action plan with health targets. And those health targets are going to guide your treatment. And we have all sorts of health targets. Some of those health targets might be based on blood work. Others might be based on how much you move your body. Could be step count, could be average heart rate per day, could be HRV or how much you sleep. It could be body composition like visceral adipose tissue or amount of muscle mass you have. So there are all these different kind of health targets that we may decide on with you. And then you're going to work towards those. And we're going to track those health targets. And so you've got this module, which again contains those three things. It contains testing, analysis, and then a custom action plan just for you around that space. And also the thing to recognize is we go really pretty deep. So if you do a heart health module, we're going to be doing blood tests that you've probably not even heard of. Like we're going to try to figure out, do you make too much cholesterol or do you absorb too much cholesterol? How is your fatty acid levels? How's your CoQ10 level? What is the inflammation like in your heart? Like we're going to look at that very deeply for that one module. And then you're going to meet with your doctor for an hour and you're going to go over these results and come up with a custom action plan just for you. And so I think the module framework is really nice because it makes it bite-sized. It makes it so that you take the time to really understand what you're working on and then make a plan moving forward. And it's so funny. I heard Tim Ferriss one time say he wrote the 4-Hour Body. And the 4-Hour Body has all these hacks about how to be healthy. And he said he had a bunch of people say, hey, just write down the 5 things I need to do on a yellow sticky note and give it to me. And he's like, I did that for like 10 of my friends and none of them made any changes. And the people who read the book, who took the time, who really understood, who educated themselves and read the book, they made changes. And I kind of think about that with the modules. When people come to me and say, I want all the testing right up front, I think, okay, like I could take your money, but I don't think that's good for you. Like, I really think if you want to make changes, we have to educate you and we're going to have to do this a bit at a time so that you understand and you can make the changes that are necessary.
Yeah. Another thing I like about the module framework is that it's flexible, right? So you have blood-based testing that we do in baseline, but some of the other modules have completely different modalities or ways of getting the data that we need to help you on your health journey, stuff like DEXAs, CGMs. And so it's neat to have a framework that works for these different areas of health and can support different ways of testing altogether. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, today we had somebody in here doing a VO2 max and, checking their leg strength, their upper body strength, how high can they jump, all those kinds of things that we know are important so you don't fall when you're older or you stay really healthy. A VO2 max is kind of the master biomarker of how your health is. And I think what's difficult for a doctor's office is there's a certain number of tests they're equipped to do. And they're limited. They're mostly limited to vital signs, blood work. If you go to your primary care doctor, maybe they have x-rays there. And people wonder, like, how can we deliver great care in 100% virtual framework? And I think of it as we have the full breadth of testing available to us. And I understand that I'm not going to hear your heart, but we can get an EKG done on you in your home or at one of our partners. And, I may not be able to palpate your thyroid, but if you decide to do a full body MRI, then I'm going to get a better look at your thyroid than I would have gotten by feeling it with my fingers. And so really, I think all these different modalities of testing just give us a clearer picture of what's going on with you, with your body, with your health, and help you understand so that you can make the changes you need.
All right. I think we've covered a lot of awesome ground, but one last question. So you do a baseline, then do you repeat that thing? How often do you do it?
Yeah. So today we'll do a baseline every 6 months. And again, I think you and I have wondered, do you like keep calling it baseline? Because you should really only have one baseline once. I think you get a baseline, but then there's like baseline recheck. So you get your baseline test and then you get similar tests, but then customized to you at that 6 month mark. So we might find that there are some things we don't need to recheck every 6 months. We might find that there are other things that we want to add in just for you. And so you get that recheck in 6 months. And I think even if you don't join Bionic Health, I think you can use this framework in your own health. And one interesting thing is you've been a big proponent of this. We've built the ability for anybody in the states that we practice medicine can download our app and order labs. And so they could kind of do this on their own if they want to. Now, I would argue they're really going to miss something without having the expertise of a physician trained in this kind of medicine. But I want anybody who wants to make changes to have the opportunity to work on these types of things. And so one cool thing is somebody could download our app, do their own baseline. 6 months later, they could do another baseline recheck. They could do their heart health labs. They could do all sorts of things. So I think that no matter what you do, you should be digging into what's going on in your body and figuring out how do you make the healthy changes that you need to.
Yep. That's awesome. Well, I think this was a great episode. Send us your feedback and let us know. Ask us any questions and we'll try to cover it in the next one. And I think in the future, we're going to dig into the other modules and give the same due diligence that we have to baseline.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Jared. See ya.
See ya. Thank you for listening to another episode of Medicine 3.0. We make this podcast so that you know where to turn for good information on keeping you and your loved ones healthy. Feel free to check us out at bionichealth.com, where we can help you live a longer, happier life.